A routine perimeter sweep at Skinwalker Ranch was supposed to produce nothing. Standard operating procedure. Cameras running, instruments logging, another night of baseline documentation on a property that has spent decades producing phenomenon that nobody can explain. What the footage captured during that sweep was not baseline. It was not explainable, and when the team reviewed it the following morning, the conversation in that room stopped in a way that nobody present has been willing to fully describe on camera since. Subscribe and stay until the end, because what the perimeter footage revealed changes everything. Skinwalker Ranch in the Uinta Basin of northeastern Utah has never behaved the way a normal piece of land behaves. Every other property in the documented history of paranormal investigation sits and waits for something to happen. Skinwalker Ranch has never operated that way. From the moment the Sherman family arrived in the early 1990s and encountered a catalog of phenomenon that dismantled their understanding of physical reality within weeks of moving onto the property, the ranch has functioned less like a location where strange things happen and more like a location that is actively producing them, with what researchers who have spent serious time there have described as an unsettling quality of intention. The Shermans documented cattle mutilations performed with a surgical precision that veterinary analysis could not attribute to any known predator or instrument. Objects appeared and disappeared from locked structures without mechanical explanation. Lights moved through the night sky in patterns that violated every known principle of aerodynamics. And something physical and enormous left evidence in the soil of the property that Terry Sherman spent the rest of his life describing in terms that the subsequent decades of ridicule never shook. What the government researchers who followed the Shermans onto the property documented was a phenomenon that behaved with the same quality of apparent intention across independent research programs separated by years of time and significant differences in methodology. The NIDS program funded by Robert Bigelow and the Pentagon's AAWSAP initiative that followed it both produced findings pointing in the same direction. A phenomenon that responded to observation, that appeared to track the capability level of whoever was investigating it, and that calibrated its activity in direct correspondence with the sophistication of the instruments being deployed. Brandon Fugel bought the property in 2016 with the resources to close the gap between what the phenomenon was producing and what the instrumentation could capture. 5 seasons of documented investigation have narrowed that gap significantly. The perimeter sweep program, the network of cameras and sensors running continuously around the ranch's boundary, was designed to catch what the targeted investigation sessions inside the property's active zones were missing. The assumption behind the program was that whatever was producing the phenomenon at the ranch's interior was generating it from within the property boundary. The perimeter footage reviewed following the sweep in question challenged that assumption in a way that nobody on the investigation team was prepared for, because what the cameras caught was not coming from inside the ranch. It was approaching from outside it, and the implications of that distinction are what make the footage the most significant thing the perimeter program has ever produced. The decision to establish a continuous perimeter monitoring program around Skinwalker Ranch was not made in a production meeting. It was made in response to a specific pattern in the investigation data that had accumulated across multiple seasons of fieldwork, and that pointed to a gap in the surveillance architecture the investigation had been operating with: the targeted investigation sessions inside the active zones of the ranch, the mesa, the homestead triangle, the areas of concentrated electromagnetic anomaly that the early seasons had identified, were producing data of increasing specificity and significance. What they were not producing was information about what was happening at the ranch's boundaries during the periods between active investigation sessions. The phenomenon documented at the ranch had consistently demonstrated an awareness of when investigation activity was occurring and where it was concentrated. Equipment failed at rates that correlated with proximity to active investigation zones. Aerial phenomenon was documented predominantly during active session windows. Physical effects on crew members were concentrated in periods of direct investigative engagement with the property's most active areas. The pattern suggested that whatever was producing the phenomenon was responsive to investigation activity in real time, that it tracked where the cameras and instruments were deployed and calibrated its activity accordingly. The perimeter program was designed to address this by establishing a surveillance presence that the phenomenon could not avoid by simply staying clear of wherever the active investigation was focused. Cameras and sensors running continuously around the full boundary of the property would document whatever was occurring at the ranch's edges, regardless of where the active investigation team was positioned inside it. The technical infrastructure deployed for the perimeter program represented the most sophisticated continuous surveillance architecture the investigation had yet committed to a single monitoring function. infrared cameras capable of detecting movement and heat signatures in complete darkness, acoustic sensors running across the full audible and infrasound spectrum, electromagnetic monitoring stations positioned at intervals around the perimeter logging fields strength and frequency data continuously, ground vibration sensors calibrated to detect movement at depths corresponding to the underground structures the sonar had identified beneath the property. The program ran for months before the sweep in question produced the footage that changed what everyone involved thought they understood about the nature and the source of what Skinwalker Ranch has been documenting for decades. What the cameras logged during that sweep was reviewed the following morning by a technical team whose collective fieldwork experience at the ranch runs to hundreds of investigation sessions across multiple seasons. The review session lasted longer than any prior footage review in the program's history, and when it ended, the first call made was not to the production team. It was to a researcher whose background is not in paranormal investigation. To understand the full significance of what the perimeter sweep footage revealed, it is necessary to first understand what every prior investigation of Skinwalker Ranch had been focused on, and what that focus had systematically caused everyone to overlook. The documented history of investigation at the ranch, from the Sherman family's first-hand accounts through the NIDS and AAWSAP programs, and into the current broadcast investigation, has been organized around a consistent assumption. The assumption is that the source of the phenomenon is inside the ranch's boundary, the mesa, the homestead, the active zones identified through years of instrument deployment. All of it has been treated as the origin point of whatever is producing the extraordinary catalog of documented events that have made this property the most investigated paranormal location in American history. That assumption shaped every research program that engaged with the ranch. It shaped which areas the instruments were concentrated in. It shaped the questions the investigations were designed to answer. And it shaped the surveillance architecture that every investigation, including the current one, had deployed before the perimeter program introduced a monitoring presence that looked outward from the ranch boundary rather than inward toward its active zones. The AAWSAP researchers who spent years at the property with a level of funding and institutional support that dwarfs anything the private investigation has been able to deploy were working inside the same assumption. Their instruments were concentrated on the property's interior. Their investigation sessions were organized around the active zones the preliminary data had identified. Their findings, the portions that have entered the public record through Freedom of Information disclosures, are all oriented inward, toward what is happening inside the ranch boundary rather than toward what might be approaching it from outside. Bruce Leland, a researcher with extensive fieldwork in the region, noted in a published assessment of the cumulative Skinwalker Ranch investigation record that the entire body of documented research shared a single methodological blind spot. Every program had been designed to study the phenomenon from within the territory it was already known to occupy. None of them had deployed systematic monitoring of the approach vectors, the directions and pathways through which whatever was producing the phenomenon arrived at the property before the investigation cameras ever had a chance to document it. The perimeter sweep program was the first systematic attempt to close that blind spot. What it documented when it finally caught something in the sweep in question was evidence that the blind spot had been hiding the most significant element of what Skinwalker Ranch represents. Not what happens inside the boundary, but what the boundary itself is an interface for. The footage from that sweep did not show the phenomenon operating inside the ranch. It showed the phenomenon arriving, and the direction it was arriving from, and the manner in which it was approaching, is what sent the technical team's first call to a researcher whose expertise is not in paranormal investigation. The perimeter sweep that produced the footage in question was conducted during a period of reduced active investigation activity at the ranch, a window between targeted session deployments when the interior of the property was not occupied by the investigation team, and the only surveillance running was the continuous perimeter monitoring network. This detail is significant. The phenomenon documented at the ranch across its investigation history has consistently exhibited an awareness of when active investigation sessions are occurring and a calibrated response to that awareness. During active sessions, the phenomenon produces evidence within the range of whatever instruments are deployed. During inactive periods, the documented assumption has always been that whatever is producing the phenomenon is dormant or absent. The perimeter sweep footage challenges that assumption directly. The cameras began logging anomalous readings at 2:17 in the morning. The electromagnetic monitoring station on the ranch's northern boundary registered a field strength elevation that the continuous baseline data for that station identified as outside the normal variance range for that position. The elevation was not dramatic in its initial magnitude. It was the kind of reading that in a single session review might have been flagged as an instrument artifact and set aside. What made it significant was its duration and its directionality. The elevation held steady for 11 minutes. It did not spike and return to baseline in the pattern of an equipment artifact or an atmospheric transient. It held, and then it began moving. The electromagnetic anomaly tracked across the northern boundary sensors in a sequential pattern, Station 1 registering the elevation first, then Station 2, then 3, in a progression consistent with something moving along the outside of the ranch's northern perimeter, at a pace the sensor data allowed the technical team to calculate. The infrared cameras covering the northern boundary logged their first anomalous reading at 2:23. The image captured in that initial frame, and in the 47 frames that followed across the next 6 minutes, is what the technical team spent the rest of that review session trying to find a conventional explanation for. The acoustic sensors running along the northern perimeter registered something in the infrasound range beginning at 2:19, 2 minutes before the infrared cameras logged their first visual anomaly, at frequencies and with a structural pattern that the audio specialist on the technical team identified as unlike anything in the ranch's prior acoustic monitoring record. The ground vibration sensors logged their first reading at 2:21. The vibration signature they recorded was not consistent with animal movement across the surface. It was consistent with something moving through the underground formation that runs beneath the northern section of the ranch's boundary. All 4 sensor categories registered anomalous readings within a 6-minute window. All 4 readings were directionally consistent, originating outside the ranch boundary and moving toward its interior, and all 4 ceased simultaneously at 2:29, 12 minutes after the electromagnetic station first logged the elevation that started the sequence. The infrared footage from the northern perimeter cameras covering the relevant window is the centerpiece of what the sweep produced, and the element of the recording that the technical team returned to repeatedly during the review session that followed. Infrared cameras operating at the sensitivity level deployed in the perimeter program produce imagery that is unambiguous in its basic content. Heat signatures against a cooler background rendered in the characteristic white-on-black or green-on-black palette that makes thermal imaging one of the most reliable surveillance technologies available for detecting movement in complete darkness. What the cameras logged during the relevant window is not ambiguous in the sense that there is something there. The anomaly is visible across multiple camera feeds covering overlapping sections of the northern perimeter, which eliminates single-camera artifact as an explanation. It is present in consecutive frames across a 6-minute window, which eliminates a transient reflection or atmospheric distortion, and it moves, not randomly, not in the pattern of wind-driven debris or an animal crossing the frame, but with a directionality and a consistency of movement that the technical team's analysis established as purposeful rather than incidental. What the anomaly is, in terms of any category that the investigation's prior experience or the broader scientific literature provides, is where the footage parts company with every conventional explanation the review session produced. The heat signature does not correspond to any known animal species whose range includes the Uinta Basin. Its dimensions, as rendered by the thermal imaging, fall outside the size range of every native and introduced species documented in the region. Its movement pattern across the camera frames does not match the gait signature of any quadruped or biped in the investigation team's reference database, and the manner in which it interacts with the ranch boundary, approaching to within a specific distance, and then holding that distance with a consistency that the frame-by-frame analysis documents across the full 6 minutes of its presence, suggests an awareness of the boundary itself that no animal operating on instinct or territorial behavior would exhibit. The most significant element of the infrared footage is not what is visible in the frames where the anomaly is present. It is what happens in the frames immediately before its first appearance and immediately after its final one. In the 3 frames preceding the first frame in which the anomaly registers, the background thermal environment of the northern perimeter changes in a manner that the camera's baseline data identifies as outside normal variance. The ambient temperature reading across the frame drops by a margin that the technical team's analysis flagged as requiring explanation before the anomaly itself had even been identified as the focus of the review. And in the frames following the anomaly's disappearance, The background thermal environment returns to baseline, not gradually, as it would following a natural temperature event, but instantaneously, between one frame and the next, with no transitional period. That instantaneous return to baseline is the detail that sent the technical team's first call to a researcher outside the investigation's normal chain of consultation. It is not how temperature works. It is not how anything that operates within the known physical parameters of the natural world works. And it is not the first time something documented at Skinwalker Ranch has behaved as though the known physical parameters of the natural world do not apply to it. It is the first time that behavior has been documented at the ranch's perimeter, rather than its interior. The infrared footage is the most immediately striking element of the sweep, but it is not the most analytically significant. That distinction belongs to the instrument data running concurrently, 4 independent data streams that cannot be explained away by any argument about camera artifacts or thermal imaging anomalies. The electromagnetic data from the northern boundary stations tells a story that begins before the cameras logged their first visual anomaly. The field's strength elevation was concentrated and localized, highest at the stations closest to where the infrared cameras placed the anomaly, decreasing in precise inverse proportion to distance. That spatial distribution allows triangulation. When that triangulation is mapped against the infrared footage frame by frame, the electromagnetic source position and the thermal anomaly position correspond with a precision the technical team characterized as beyond the margin of coincidence. The acoustic infrasound data adds a third independent stream. The readings logged 2 minutes before the cameras first captured the thermal anomaly are structured, cycling through a repeating sequence with the internal organization of a signal rather than background noise. The ground vibration data is the fourth stream and the most consequential. Its signature indicates a source at depth, a depth corresponding precisely to the upper boundary of the underground void network the sonar has mapped beneath the northern perimeter. Something was moving through the underground formation at the same time. Something was approaching from above. 4 independent streams, 1 6-minute window, 1 location. The perimeter sweep data forces a reconsideration of the entire body of Skinwalker Ranch investigation that preceded it. Every prior program, NIDS, AAW, SAP, the current broadcast investigation, produced its data from inside the property boundary, oriented toward the phenomenon's expression within that boundary. The perimeter footage introduces something none of those programs were architecturally capable of producing, evidence of what the phenomenon does at the boundary itself during periods when the interior is unoccupied and no active investigation is running. What that evidence reveals is that the phenomenon does not go dormant between investigation sessions. It continues operating. And what it does when the interior is unoccupied is different in character from what the active sessions document. The active sessions capture the phenomenon responding to investigation, calibrating its output to instrument capability, producing evidence within the range of what can be captured. The perimeter data captures something different. It captures the phenomenon approaching from outside the boundary, moving along that boundary with an awareness of it, and engaging with the underground structure beneath it in a manner the vibration data establishes as active and deliberate. The implication is the most significant reframing the investigation has produced. The ranch is not the source of the phenomenon, it is a destination. Whatever has been documented at Skinwalker Ranch for decades does not originate on the property. It arrives there, and it arrives through pathways the interior-focused investigation has never been positioned to observe. The section of the Uinta Basin from which the perimeter data establishes the phenomenon was approaching is not a section that prior investigation programs overlooked out of oversight. It was overlooked out of policy. The AAWSAP documents that have partially entered the public record through Freedom of Information disclosures include a geographic mapping assessment of the broader basin. The area corresponding to the approach vector, the perimeter sweep established, is referenced in those documents, in a section whose surrounding context is heavily redacted in a targeted rather than blanket manner. The only unredacted text in the relevant passage does not describe the area in geological or atmospheric terms. It describes it in the language of access restriction. Someone within the AAWSAP structure investigated that section of the basin, documented what they found, and those findings were restricted to a subset of program personnel whose identity the release documents do not disclose. The current investigation has never deployed instruments there. The broadcast episodes have never addressed it. The perimeter sweep footage is the first evidence produced outside the classified research framework that connects it directly to what is operating at the ranch. The government knew where the phenomenon was coming from. They investigated the source, restricted their findings, and said nothing to any research program that came after them. The perimeter footage just pointed the current investigation directly at what they were protecting. Skinwalker Ranch has been documented, investigated, and studied for decades by programs ranging from lone researchers to Pentagon-funded initiatives with classified budgets. Every one of them pointed their instruments inward, at the mesa, at the homestead, at the active zones inside the boundary. Every one of them was looking in the right place for the wrong reason. The ranch is not where the phenomenon originates. It is where the phenomenon arrives. The perimeter sweep footage is the first evidence produced outside the classified research framework that establishes where it arrives from. And the approach vector it establishes points directly at a section of the Uinta Basin that the government investigated, restricted, and declined to share with anyone who came after them. That section of the basin has never been systematically monitored by any public investigation program. It has never been addressed in any broadcast episode. It has never appeared in any Freedom of Information disclosure in a form that reveals what the AAWS-AP team found there. The perimeter footage just changed that. The investigation now has a direction that decades of interior-focused research could never have produced. What is waiting at the end of that approach vector has been waiting for a long time, and whatever it is, the government has known about it since before the current investigation began. Brandon Fugal has spent millions of dollars and years of his life trying to understand what is happening beneath Skinwalker Ranch. He has brought in physicists, aerospace engineers, government-connected scientists, and some of the most sophisticated detection equipment ever deployed at a private research site. He has watched his team get hurt, watched equipment fail without explanation, and watched the mesa resist every attempt to penetrate its secrets. But what the scientific team detected beneath the mesa during the most recent phase of investigation was something that none of their frameworks had prepared them for, something that moved, something that responded, something alive. And when Brandon Fugal saw the data, he shut it all down. If you are new here, subscribe now, because what is living beneath the mesa at Skinwalker Ranch changes everything the scientific team thought they were dealing with. To understand why the detection of life beneath the mesa at Skinwalker Ranch produced a response serious enough to shut down the entire operation, you first have to understand what the mesa is within the context of the ranch and why, across every phase of investigation the property has undergone, from the earliest NIDS research through the current Fugal-era scientific program, the mesa has always occupied a position at the absolute center of whatever is happening on that land. The mesa is not simply an elevated geological feature on the Skinwalker Ranch property. It is the focal point around which the most significant and the most inexplicable phenomena documented at the ranch have consistently organized themselves across decades of investigation by multiple independent research teams. The Sherman family, who owned the ranch during the period that first brought it to national attention, documented their most extreme and most disturbing experiences in proximity to the mesa. The NADS team that investigated the property in the late 1990s and early 2000s identified the mesa as the location producing the highest concentration of anomalous phenomena and dedicated significant investigative resources to understanding what was generating those phenomena without arriving at a satisfactory explanation. Every subsequent investigation team, including the current scientific program operating under Brandon Fugal's ownership, has found the mesa to be the location where the ranch's phenomena are most concentrated, most consistent, and most resistant to conventional explanation. The physical characteristics of the mesa have been studied extensively without producing a complete understanding of its geology or its composition. Ground-penetrating radar surveys conducted during the current investigation have produced returns suggesting structural anomalies beneath the mesa's surface that do not correspond to the expected geological profile of the region. Anomalies that the scientific team has discussed publicly in terms that acknowledge their existence without fully accounting for what produced them or what they contain. Drilling operations directed at the mesa have encountered resistance and equipment failure at depths and under conditions that the team's engineers cannot explain through conventional geological frameworks. The airspace above the mesa has produced more documented anomalous aerial phenomena than any other location on the ranch, and the physical effects on researchers who spend extended time in close proximity to the mesa, the health impacts, the equipment malfunctions, the psychological and physiological responses that the show has documented across multiple seasons are more pronounced and more severe in the mesa's vicinity than anywhere else on the property. All of which means that the detection of something alive beneath the mesa is not simply a new data point added to an existing investigation, It is the thing that every phase of Skinwalker Ranch investigation has been moving toward, the answer to the question that the Mesa has been generating for decades, arriving in a form that nobody on the scientific team was prepared to receive. Understanding the significance of what the scientific team detected beneath the Mesa requires understanding the program that produced the detection. Because the investigation Brandon Fugal has built at Skinwalker Ranch is not a television production using scientific aesthetics for dramatic effect. It is a genuine and substantially funded scientific research program that happens to be documented by a television production, and the distinction matters because it determines the credibility of everything the program produces, including the detection that shut the ranch down. When Brandon Fugal purchased Skinwalker Ranch in 2016 for $4.5 million, he brought to the property something that previous investigation phases had lacked: the combination of substantial private resources, genuine scientific credibility through his connections to the aerospace and technology industries, and a personal commitment to applying the most rigorous available scientific methodology to a set of phenomena that previous investigations had documented but not explained. The team he assembled reflects that commitment. Dr. Travis Taylor, whose background in astrophysics, optical science, and aerospace defense research provided the program with a level of scientific credentialing that no previous Skinwalker Ranch investigation had possessed, was the lead scientist for the program's most intensive investigative phases. The supporting scientific team included specialists in geology, physics, biology, chemistry, and electromagnetic phenomena, as well as engineers with backgrounds in defense and aerospace technology who brought both expertise and equipment to the investigation that would not otherwise have been available to a private research program of this kind. The equipment deployed at the ranch under Fugal's program represents a significant escalation from previous investigation phases. Ground-penetrating radar systems capable of imaging subsurface features at depths and resolutions not previously applied to the property, atmospheric monitoring equipment drawn from aerospace and defense applications, biological detection systems designed for field deployment in environments with complex and variable conditions, and a network of fixed and mobile sensors providing continuous monitoring of the property's electromagnetic, acoustic, and environmental conditions at a level of coverage and resolution that the NIDES program, operating with the technology of the late 1990s, could not have achieved. It is this program, built over years of sustained investment and scientific engagement, that produced the detection beneath the Mesa. And it is the credibility of this program, established through seasons of documented scientific work at the ranch, that makes the shutdown Brandon Fugal ordered in response to that detection something that cannot be dismissed as a production decision or a dramatic narrative choice. The detection that changed everything at Skinwalker Ranch did not arrive as a single dramatic instrument reading or a single moment of equipment response. It arrived the way the most significant scientific findings typically arrive, as an accumulation of data from multiple independent systems that individually suggested something unusual and collectively pointed toward a conclusion that the scientific team found both compelling and deeply unsettling. The initial indication came from the ground-penetrating radar system that had been conducting ongoing subsurface surveys of the Mesa as part of the investigation's long-term geological mapping program. A survey pass conducted during the most recent phase of investigation returned data showing a subsurface anomaly at a depth consistent with the structural irregularities documented in previous surveys, but with a characteristic that had not appeared in prior data. The anomaly was not static. The returns showed a feature that had changed position between successive survey passes, conducted at intervals that the geological team assessed as too short for any known geological process to account for the degree of positional change recorded. Something beneath the Mesa had moved. The geological team's initial response was to treat the finding as an instrument artifact, a malfunction or calibration error in the survey equipment, and to run the survey again with recalibrated instruments before drawing any conclusions. The repeat surveys did not resolve the anomaly. They confirmed it, and they added detail that the initial pass had not captured. The moving feature was not uniform in its subsurface signature. It had a boundary, a defined edge that distinguished it from the surrounding geological material in a way that suggested an object or a mass rather than a fluid or gaseous pocket. And its movement between survey passes was not random. It had direction, and across multiple successive surveys, that direction was consistent, suggesting displacement along a trajectory rather than diffuse shifting in response to environmental pressure. When the radar findings were cross-referenced with data from the biological detection systems that had been operating continuously in the Mesa's vicinity, the picture that emerged was one that the scientific team found genuinely difficult to process. The biological sensors had been recording environmental data throughout the period covered by the radar surveys. When that data was reviewed against the timeline of the subsurface anomaly's movements, correlations emerged that the team's scientists assessed as statistically significant. The biological sensor readings elevated during periods corresponding to the anomaly's detected movement, not slightly, substantially and repeatedly, across multiple instances in the data record, with a consistency that the team's statisticians found could not be attributed to coincidence or environmental noise. Something beneath the mesa was moving, and when it moved, the biological detection equipment responded as if something alive was responsible for the movement. The response of the Skinwalker Ranch scientific team to the data produced by the mesa detection was not immediate alarm or immediate shutdown. It was the methodical and disciplined process of scientists who have spent years operating in an environment that consistently produces data that resists explanation, and who have learned, through that experience, to subject anomalous findings to the most rigorous available scrutiny before drawing conclusions. The first response was verification. Every instrument that had contributed data to the anomalous finding was tested, recalibrated, and run through independent diagnostic assessment to rule out equipment malfunction as an explanation. The ground-penetrating radar system was checked against known reference targets to confirm its spatial accuracy and its positional consistency. The biological detection equipment was calibrated against known environmental inputs to establish that its elevated readings during the anomaly periods were not the product of instrument drift or environmental interference. The data processing and analysis pipeline was reviewed by the team's software and engineering specialists to confirm that the correlations identified between the radar data and the biological sensor data were not artifacts of the analytical method. The verification process took time and was conducted with a thoroughness that reflected both the seriousness of the finding and the scientific team's awareness that a conclusion of this magnitude required the complete elimination of conventional explanations before it could be taken seriously. When the verification process was complete, the conventional explanations had been eliminated. The anomaly was real. The movement was real. The correlation between the movement and the biological sensor response was real. What remained, after every instrument check and every analytical review, was data describing something beneath the mesa at Skinwalker Ranch that was moving with direction and consistency, and whose movement was accompanied by biological sensor responses that the team's scientists could not account for through any mechanism other than the presence of a living organism at the depth and location the radar data indicated. That conclusion was presented to Brandon Fugel. His response was immediate. He reviewed the data personally, asked the scientific team to walk him through their verification process, confirmed that the conventional explanations had been thoroughly excluded, and then made the decision that the data required. He shut the investigation down. The decision Brandon Fugel made when the scientific team presented him with the mesa detection data was not a simple decision, and understanding it fully requires understanding both what the data showed and what Brandon Fugel's relationship to the ranch, to the investigation, and to the responsibility of ownership actually is. Brandon Fugel is not a person who shuts things down easily or without substantial cause. He is a businessman of considerable success, accustomed to making decisions under conditions of uncertainty and to proceeding with complex and high-stakes endeavors when the evidence supports doing so. He purchased Skinwalker Ranch over the objections of people in his professional circle who thought the acquisition was irrational. He has continued to invest in its investigation through seasons of findings that raised more questions than they answered, and through personal experiences on the property that he has described as genuinely disturbing. He has watched members of his scientific team suffer health effects from their work at the ranch and has continued the investigation. He is not someone who stops because things are difficult or because the findings are uncomfortable. What the mesa detection data presented him with was something different from discomfort or difficulty. It presented him with a direct implication about what the investigation was dealing with beneath the mesa, an implication that changed the risk calculus for every person operating on the ranch in a fundamental way. If something alive is moving beneath the mesa at the depth and scale the data suggested, the investigation's existing safety protocols were built around an incomplete understanding of what those protocols needed to protect against. Every drilling operation directed at the mesa, every ground disturbance in its vicinity, Every activity that had been conducted on the basis of an understanding of the mesa as a geological feature rather than a geological feature containing living presence needed to be reassessed against a different set of risk parameters. The shutdown was not a retreat. It was a recognition that the investigation had arrived at a threshold where proceeding without a fundamental reassessment of what was being dealt with and what precautions that dealing required would be irresponsible toward the people whose safety Brandon Fugel is responsible for. He shut it down because the data told him that what was beneath the mesa was not what the investigation had assumed, and that assuming incorrectly about what is beneath the mesa has consequences that the scientific team could not yet fully scope. The detection of life beneath the mesa at Skinwalker Ranch raises a question that the scientific community and the broader public interested in the ranch's phenomena will inevitably ask. How did every previous investigation of the property, across decades of research by multiple independent teams with access to the best available technology of their respective eras, miss something that the current program found? The answer to that question is not simple, and it is not flattering to the idea that the previous investigation phases were comprehensive in their scope or their methodology, but it is also not a reflection of incompetence or carelessness on the part of the researchers who conducted them. The NIDES program that investigated the ranch in the late 1990s and early 2000s was operating at the frontier of applied paranormal and anomalous phenomena research with the technology and the methodological frameworks available at that time. The ground-penetrating radar systems available to that program were less capable than the current program's equipment in their depth penetration, their spatial resolution, and their ability to detect subtle changes in subsurface features over time. The biological detection capabilities available to NIDS were not designed for the specific application of detecting biological presence at depth in a complex geological environment. The program documented extraordinary things. It established the foundational evidentiary record for the current investigation to build on, but it was not equipped to find what the current program found, and the absence of a finding is not evidence of an absence. The Sherman family, who preceded NIDS and whose experiences on the property remain the most visceral and the most personally documented in the ranch's recorded history, described encounters and phenomena that, in retrospect, are consistent with an active presence beneath the mesa in ways that were not recognized as such at the time because the framework for interpreting them in those terms did not exist. The cattle mutilations, the disappearances, the sense described by multiple family members of something beneath the ground that was aware of their presence on the surface. These experiences were documented as evidence of the ranch's anomalous character without being understood as potentially diagnostic of specifically biological subsurface presence. What the current program's detection did was not discover something that previous investigations failed to find. It developed the methodological capability to formally detect and document something that the ranch's own history had been pointing toward for decades. The implications of a confirmed living presence beneath the mesa at Skinwalker Ranch extend in multiple directions simultaneously, and none of those directions leads to a simple or comfortable destination. The scientific implications alone are significant enough to represent a fundamental challenge to the existing understanding of what can live where, at what depth, under what conditions, and with what relationship to the surface environment directly above it. The depth at which the detection data places the anomalous biological presence is not a depth at which any known organism of the implied scale is documented to exist in the geological context of the American interior. Known subterranean life at significant depth consists of microbial communities, insects, and small invertebrates occupying cave systems and groundwater environments, none of which produce the scale of biological sensor response or the subsurface displacement profile that the mesa detection data describes. Whatever is living beneath the mesa, if the scientific team's interpretation of the data is correct, is something that the existing biological and geological literature has no category for, and the absence of that category is not a minor gap. It is a hole in the scientific understanding of what is possible in the natural world large enough to require a significant and sustained revision of multiple fields of research simultaneously. The implications for the ranch's documented history of anomalous phenomena are equally significant. If there is a living presence beneath the mesa, the phenomena that have been documented above it for decades, the equipment failures, the health effects on researchers, the atmospheric anomalies, the aerial phenomena concentrated in the mesa's airspace become potentially explicable as the surface manifestations of an active subsurface biology rather than as independent and unconnected anomalies. The mesa would not be the location where Skinwalker Ranch's phenomena are most concentrated because of some abstract property of the geography. It would be the location where they are most concentrated because something living there is generating them, either directly through its biological processes or indirectly through whatever mechanisms it uses to interact with the environment above it. That reframing changes the entire investigative program. It changes what questions the investigation should be asking, what evidence it should be prioritizing, and what the goal of the investigation actually is. Because understanding a geological and electromagnetic anomaly is a different project from understanding a living organism that has apparently occupied the space beneath the mesa for a period of time that the investigation has not yet been able to determine. The public statement Brandon Fugal has made about the mesa detection and the shutdown of the investigation is carefully bounded. He has confirmed that the scientific team found something significant. He has confirmed that the findings prompted him to halt the current phase of investigation. He has framed the shutdown in terms that acknowledge the seriousness of what was detected, without fully characterizing what the detection showed or what the scientific team's interpretation of the data concluded. The gap between what he has said publicly and what the people close to the investigation know he knows is a gap that those who follow Skinwalker Ranch closely have learned to read carefully, because Brandon Fugal is not a person given to understatement, and when he is understating, the distance between what he is saying and what he knows is itself a measure of how significant the undisclosed information is. The people close to the investigation describe a Brandon Fugal who has not simply been shaken by the mesa detection data in the way that a dramatic and unexpected scientific finding shakes someone. They describe a man who has been processing a specific and detailed understanding of what the data implies and who has been doing that processing against the backdrop of everything he has personally witnessed and experienced at the ranch across years of ownership. Brandon Fugal has had experiences on the Skinwalker Ranch property that he has not fully disclosed publicly. He has been deliberately measured in what he shares about his personal encounters at the ranch, more measured than the members of his scientific team who have spoken more openly about the effects the property has had on them. And that measured quality of his public persona on the subject of the ranch is understood by the people who know him to reflect not a lack of significant personal experience, but a deliberate choice about how much of that experience to bring into the public conversation at any given point. The mesa detection data gave that deliberate choice a new and more urgent dimension. What Fugal knows about what is beneath the mesa, assembled from years of personal experience at the ranch, from conversations with the scientific team that have not been made public, and from the specific content of the detection data itself, is a body of knowledge that his public statements have been carefully shaped around without fully revealing. The shutdown he ordered was driven by that knowledge, and the terms on which he will eventually share it fully are terms that the current moment has not yet produced. The shutdown Brandon Fugal ordered is not the end of the Skinwalker Ranch investigation. It is the end of the investigation as it was previously configured, operating on assumptions about the mesa that the detection data has permanently invalidated. What comes next is structured around a single question that everything before it has been building toward. What is living beneath the mesa? The biological material and the full detection data record are being analyzed now, and the results of that analysis will determine the terms on which the investigation resumes and the terms on which what was found is disclosed publicly. For Brandon Fugal, this is the moment his 6 years of ownership have produced. He came to the ranch for answers. The mesa detection is an answer, but one that opens onto questions larger than anything the investigation began with. Something is beneath the mesa. It is alive. It has been there across decades of documented phenomena that the people above it could not explain because they did not yet know what was generating them. Now they know. What Brandon Fugal does with that knowledge is the chapter everything before it was building toward.
Something strange is happening at Skinwalker Ranch, and tonight, its owner, Brandon Fugal, is finally breaking the silence. For years, the world has watched unexplained lights, radiation spikes, and technology failures play out on television. But now, Brandon claims the public hasn't seen even half of what's really going on. In a sudden announcement, he reveals new evidence, government pressure, and a discovery beneath the mesa that changes everything we thought we knew about about the ranch. And if what he's saying is true, then someone has been trying to keep this hidden for a very long time. Subscribe, because this story is just beginning. When Brandon Fugal agreed to a late-night interview on a small independent live stream channel, nobody expected anything unusual. He'd done hundreds of interviews over the years, always measured, always careful, always respectful of non-disclosure agreements. But on this night, something was different. His voice was tense, his posture stiff, and behind him, viewers noticed something unsettling. The blinds in his office were pulled shut, and two security guards stood just barely visible in the reflection of the glass. Before the host could finish asking the first question, Brandon leaned forward and interrupted. "There are things happening on the ranch we were never meant to understand," he said. His tone carried none of the scientific detachment he'd become known for. "And we've been told to stop digging." Literally, chat messages exploded across the screen. More than 80,000 people tuned in within minutes. Brandon then recounted an event from earlier that month, an excavation near the southern ridge of the mesa. The team had noticed recurring spikes of ionizing radiation, the same kind that had hospitalized crew members in previous seasons. But this time, there was something else. A geometric pattern carved into stone 8 feet below the surface. It wasn't modern tool work, it wasn't erosion, it had symmetry. He paused, swallowing hard. "We transmitted the data to one of our government consultants. They told us to close the site immediately and destroy the documentation." The host blinked in disbelief. Brandon continued. "When we refused, 3 unmarked helicopters flew over the ranch. No transponders, no flight plans. That's not paranoia, that's a violation." He lifted his phone and held it toward the camera. On the screen was a blurry image, a perfectly smooth circular cavity beneath the mesa, surrounded by smaller chambers. "We scanned this cavern. Something metallic is inside," he whispered. The audience went silent. Then he dropped the sentence, "that would trend worldwide within hours. We didn't discover it. Something placed it there." For the first time, Brandon wasn't smiling. He wasn't selling a mystery. He was warning us. In the days following that interview, speculation spread across the internet, but nothing compared to the information Brandon quietly shared with his research team behind closed doors. The object beneath the mesa wasn't just metallic. According to preliminary scans, its alloy composition didn't match any known industrial signature. It reflected electromagnetic pulses in a way that suggested it was designed to be found, but not easily understood. The team scheduled a controlled descent into the cavern. When technicians lowered sensors through a stabilized borehole, the instruments behaved erratically. Cameras glitched, thermal readings inverted from cold to blistering heat in seconds, and for a brief moment, a deep humming vibration rattled the equipment. One of the monitors, usually full of static, flashed a smooth outline, like a sphere inside a cradle. Then, everything went dark. Brandon ordered all gear retrieved immediately. One technician who had been tethered near the borehole surface complained of dizziness. Within hours, his skin reddened and his hair began to fall out in patches. Radiation sickness again, but this time faster, sharper. Unlike any profile the medical team recognized, the object wasn't dormant, it was interacting. That evening, Brandon contacted a federal liaison he'd worked with since the ranch went public. The response was curt: cease all penetration of the mesa and await further instruction. Hours later, the ranch's perimeter sensors detected movement. 2 unmarked SUVs idling near the property line. The drivers remained inside, headlights off, cameras pointed toward the gate. As word spread among the staff, fear took root. This wasn't like the usual UFO sightings or cattle anomalies. This was tactical interest. Someone, somewhere, knew exactly what lay under that stone. "We're not supposed to be digging here," Brandon told his lead physicist. "But if we walk away now, we may never know who built it or why it's responding." That night, as the team reviewed the corrupted footage frame by frame, they noticed something impossible. During the static blur, the sphere appeared to move, not physically rolling, but shifting orientation, like an eye turning toward a sound. The room fell silent. For the first time, Brandon wondered if the ranch wasn't protecting a secret, but guarding humanity from it. Within 48 hours of the failed borehole scan, Brandon's inbox filled with messages from agencies he'd never directly interacted with before. They weren't threats, at least not on paper. Instead, They were offers, grants, funding opportunities, partnership programs, all designed to shift control of the research to federal oversight. Every document had the same concerning clause: full custody of all recovered materials. Brandon refused them all. That's when the phones started acting strange. Calls dropped mid-sentence. Texts arrived hours late. Ranch servers logged intrusion attempts from encrypted networks bouncing across continents. "Someone's probing our systems," their cybersecurity consultant muttered, tapping through logs with shaking hands. "They're not learning who we are. They're learning where we're weakest." Meanwhile, activity on the ranch intensified. At 2:13 a.m., motion sensors positioned along the northern fence triggered repeatedly. When security cameras rotated toward the alert, they captured figures, 3 of them, standing perfectly still beyond the property line. Their height, posture, and proportions looked wrong, too stiff, too symmetrical. After 15 seconds, they vanished behind a flash of static. The next morning, Brandon gathered his senior team. He played the footage without commentary. No one spoke. "We're being watched," astrophysicist Travis Taylor finally murmured, "and not just by people." Then came the seismic data. Sensors embedded across the mesa began detecting rhythmic pulses deep underground, consistent, timed vibrations occurring every 6 minutes. They weren't earthquakes, they were signals. When Brandon forwarded the readouts to a classified contact, the reply was chillingly short: "Stop transmitting data." Around this time, rumors began circulating among staff. Stories of ranch workers hearing voices echoing from the cavern during late-night spot checks. Whispers that seemed to speak directly into the mind without air or breath. A geologist reported feeling pressure in his skull, as if his thoughts were being pulled downward toward the mesa. He resigned the next morning. Brandon doubled security, but physical guards couldn't protect against what was happening next. The dreams. Nearly half the crew began waking in the night, sweating, claiming they'd seen a dark chamber with a sphere suspended in a pale blue glow. They described the same faint hum, the same vibration captured by instruments days earlier. Identical nightmares, shared imagery. "I've seen pattern correlation before," Brandon said quietly, pacing the command room, "but I've never seen shared cognition. Something is interacting with us, and it's choosing who." More than ever, the ranch felt alive, like it was studying them back. Behind the mesa, something hidden for centuries was stirring, and the world, without knowing it, was inching closer to awakening it fully. 3 days after the seismic pulses began, the ranch's airspace, normally quiet, became unusually active. Radar picked up a small aircraft circling the mesa at low altitude. It wasn't military, but it wasn't commercial either. The pilot ignored every attempt at radio contact. As Brandon and his security chief watched the feed, the plane banked sharply and descended. Cameras mounted on its underside aimed directly at the excavation site. Within seconds, alarms blared. The ranch's monitoring system detected a sudden spike in microwave radiation emanating from the cavern. The sphere beneath the mesa was reacting to the aircraft's presence. Then, without warning, the plane's lights flickered. Its engine cut out mid-air, and the craft drifted in a slow, controlled spiral before crashing safely into a field 2 miles away. No fire, no explosion. It was as if something guided it down. Federal vehicles arrived on scene before Brandon's team could reach the wreck. Agents sealed the site and confiscated all equipment. The pilot was escorted into an unmarked van and driven away. When Brandon pressed for information, he was told only that aviation protocols had been violated. No further explanation. The next morning, new signs appeared around the perimeter. Restricted Flight Zone, Federal Authority. Brandon hadn't requested them. The FAA claimed it was for wildlife preservation. But wildlife doesn't ground planes. That night, ranch instruments caught a faint electromagnetic whisper pulsing from the mesa toward the crash site, a signal too orderly to be natural. Someone or something was communicating, and for the first time, Brandon feared the message wasn't meant for humans at all. The following week tested the ranch more than any single phenomenon ever had. The crew, normally tight-knit and resilient, began to fracture under the strain of sleepless nights, whispering voices, and unexplained health issues. Tempers flared during simple discussions, and arguments erupted over equipment placement, lab access, even meal schedules. Everyone felt it. Something was pushing them. Travis reviewed biometric data from wearable sensors the team had been testing. Heart rates were spiking at random intervals, usually when staff passed directly above the cavern area. Brainwave scans showed brief bursts of activity in regions associated with fear response and dream recall. Whatever lay beneath the mesa wasn't just emitting radiation, it was interacting neurologically. Then there were the compass failures. Every analog compass on the ranch began drifting, pulling toward the same direction, the excavation site. Digital sensors mirrored the anomaly, suggesting a magnetic field shift underground. When geologists tried to model the readings, the simulation showed an impossible shape, like a rotating torus of magnetism forming a containment shell. During a closed-door meeting, Brandon addressed the team. "The ranch has always been strange," he said, "but this is targeted. It's influencing biology, psychology, and magnetism at the same time. Something wants to be noticed." One researcher abruptly stood. Her eyes were glassy, unfocused. "Or it wants to be left alone," she murmured. She left mid-meeting, packed her belongings, and drove away without waiting for her paycheck. As tensions grew, Brandon's trusted ranch manager quietly admitted something odd. Livestock near the mesa had stopped grazing and stood facing the rock formation for hours at a time, staring without blinking, like they were listening. Sleep deprivation hit next. Crew members reported jolting awake at exactly 3:11 a.m. every night. Security logs confirmed it. Motion cameras around the mesa pulsed with static at that exact time, down to the second. "You're all on edge," the government liaison said during a call. "Shut the site down." But when Brandon asked if the government had seen similar patterns elsewhere, the line went silent for a long, uneasy moment before the call disconnected. Late that same night, the ranch's surveillance tower detected movement on the mesa. In infrared, several humanoid heat signatures stood in a semicircle, facing the excavation. They didn't move. They didn't breathe. Their heat signatures weren't biological at all, more like faint electromagnetic outlines. When security teams approached, the figures faded into the rock itself. The next morning, Brandon made an announcement that stunned the crew. Despite escalating danger, despite government warnings, they would continue. "The world doesn't get smaller when you ignore it," he said. "It just gets darker." The team nodded quietly, but no one looked reassured. Whatever was buried beneath the mesa was changing them, and now the ranch itself seemed to be choosing sides. By the end of the week, the rhythmic seismic pulses had evolved into something more complex. The waveform was no longer a simple beat. It now fluctuated in patterns that resembled data transmission. When the team converted the frequencies into audible range, a low, trembling hum filled the command center. It wasn't random. It rose, fell, and paused with eerie precision, like a message waiting for a response. Their signal analyst isolated the pattern and compared it to Earth-based communications. The spacing didn't match radio chatter, Morse, or sonar, but one thing stood out. The pulses repeated every 42 minutes. Exactly. Nothing in nature keeps time that perfectly. Worse, the pulses intensified whenever a human approached the excavation site. Heart monitors spiked. EEG sensors lit up. It was reacting to proximity, almost like curiosity. One night, around 3:11 a.m., the same minute the crew kept waking, the sensors detected a new anomaly, a faint ticking sound beneath the stone. It resembled metal expanding under heat, but the temperature readings were unchanged. Brandon and his physicist exchanged glances. "It's adjusting," she whispered. The next morning, they attempted to respond by broadcasting a controlled tone back into the cavern. For a moment, the seismic pulses stopped completely. The ranch fell eerily silent. Cameras froze. The wind itself seemed to hold its breath. Then the sphere answered. The return pulse surged with enough force to fry 2 servers and leave every screen flooded with black and white static. Embedded deep in the noise, someone caught a fragment of pattern. 6 repeating symbols outlined in geometric arcs. It wasn't language as we know it, but neither was it meaningless. As Brandon stared at the frozen frame, a chill ran across his shoulders. Whatever was down there wasn't just emitting signals, it was listening and learning. With the pulses escalating, Brandon authorized a second borehole. this time with a fiber optic camera small enough to slip through a crack in the stone chamber wall. The drill descended slowly, guided by precise telemetry, until it reached a hollow pocket beneath the mesa. The feed flickered to life. At first, all they saw was darkness. Then, the camera auto-focused, and the chamber walls came into view. They were perfectly smooth, curved, and reflective, not like cave stone, but like polished alloy. Stranger still, the surfaces were etched with repeating hexagonal patterns, each glowing faintly with a pale blue phosphorescence. As the camera panned downward, the sphere appeared in the center of the chamber, suspended several inches off the floor. It hovered in silent defiance of gravity, rotating just enough to reveal engraved arcs that resembled orbital paths. Every rotation caused the chamber walls to pulse gently, as though in resonance. Suddenly, the live feed jittered. The camera lens fogged from the inside, as if something unseen exhaled. In the control room, temperature sensors spiked plus 10 degrees in seconds. Alarms screamed. Then they heard it, a whisper. It wasn't electronic interference or wind. It was a layered voice, 3 tones speaking simultaneously, forming no recognizable word. Yet every person felt instinctively that it was directed at them. One technician stumbled backward, clutching his chest as if gripped by panic. Another dropped to his knees, hands over his ears, though no external sound registered. The feed snapped to white static. When the screen stabilized, the sphere's blue glow had intensified. The walls now rippled with shifting patterns, reacting like a living membrane. The camera began to melt, literally, its metal casing dripping as if exposed to intense heat, though thermals recorded only mild warmth. Brandon ordered the drill retracted immediately. For the rest of the night, the chamber emitted a slow, rhythmic flash, visible through cracks in the mesa. It pulsed like a heartbeat. For the first time, the team realized something terrifying. They hadn't discovered an artifact. They had awakened a system. Shaken by the chamber's reaction, Brandon halted all drilling operations and ordered a full electromagnetic sweep of the ranch. That's when the readings spiked again, except this time, they didn't originate underground. 3 distinct signals were detected hovering above the mesa, triangular in formation, only visible on specialized radar. Cameras pointed skyward captured nothing but an empty blue sky. Yet, the instruments screamed. When the team tried powering down certain sensors to reduce interference, something responded. Every device rebooted on its own. Tablets flashed unauthorized logins. Security gates opened and closed without input. It was as if the ranch's systems were being tested. Suddenly, the same whispering tone from the chamber returned, but now, through the radio array, layered voices speaking in modulation patterns. Dr. Taylor noted they resembled pulsed star maps. The pulses grew faster the longer the equipment remained disabled, like a warning. When power was restored, the signals faded. The implication was chilling. Whatever was underground did not want to be isolated. That night, ranch animals refused to approach the mesa. Camera traps showed their silhouettes pausing, staring into darkness, then backing away. The sphere beneath the rock chamber dimmed, as if going dormant. Brandon realized shutting everything down only provoked a reaction. Observing, not interfering, might be the only safe path. But then, something happened that forced his hand. At 3:14 a.m., the underground sensors activated on their own. The chamber pulsed bright enough to illuminate cracks in the mesa, visible from the valley below. Brandon knew secrecy was no longer possible, and so, in a controlled interview the next morning, he made his announcement. "We've confirmed a non-human technology below Skinwalker Ranch. For the safety of the public, we're no longer calling this a legend. We're calling it evidence." The world froze, and the ranch hummed quietly, as if listening.
Something happened at Skinwalker Ranch that nobody is talking about. The cameras stopped rolling. Experiments that had been running for months were suddenly halted. Crew schedules were wiped clean, and the silence that followed wasn't the comfortable quiet of a production break. It was the heavy silence of something gone terribly wrong. The timeline is crucial to understanding what happened. In late spring of last year, production was in full swing. The team had scheduled a series of experiments designed to test a hypothesis they'd been developing over multiple seasons, that specific locations on the ranch responded to electromagnetic stimulation in ways that suggested intelligence or at least complex reactive systems. Camera crews were on site daily. Travis Taylor and the scientific team were running constant tests. Eric Bard was analyzing data streams in real time. Dragon, the ranch's security chief, was monitoring the perimeter. Everything was normal. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon in early June, everything changed. Filming stopped mid-experiment. Not paused, stopped. Equipment was powered down. The crew was sent home, and the official explanation was deliberately vague. Technical difficulties requiring assessment. But here's what made people suspicious. Production crews know the difference between a normal pause and an emergency shutdown. In normal circumstances, you finish the day's shoot, wrap equipment properly, schedule the next session. This was different. Sources close to the production describe it as abrupt. One moment cameras were rolling, the next everyone was being asked to leave immediately. Experiments that had taken weeks to set up were abandoned mid-process. The crew schedules tell the story. Up until that Tuesday, every day for the following month was blocked for filming. By Wednesday morning, those schedules were completely cleared. No explanations, no new dates, just blank calendars and a memo about indefinite postponement pending further review. People who'd worked in television production for decades said they'd never seen anything quite like it. The speed, the totality, the lack of communication. Perhaps most telling was the simultaneous silence from everyone involved. Travis Taylor, who regularly engaged with fans on social media, went quiet about ranch activities. Brandon Fugel, the ranch's owner who'd been open about experiments, stopped discussing current investigations. Crew members who used to share behind-the-scenes photos suddenly posted nothing from the ranch. It was coordinated, deliberate, the kind of silence that comes with NDAS and serious legal implications. This wasn't planned downtime. Production breaks are announced. Seasonal gaps are expected. This was something else entirely. A full stop in the middle of active investigation, leaving equipment in place and experiments unfinished. Whatever happened that Tuesday didn't just pause the show. It changed the entire trajectory of how the ranch would be investigated going forward. The experiment that preceded the shutdown was relatively routine by Skinwalker Ranch standards. The team was conducting electromagnetic testing in an area known for high strangeness, using a combination of RF spectrum analyzers, magnetometers, and high-speed cameras. They'd done similar tests dozens of times. This should have been unremarkable. What made this different was the consistency of the anomaly. In past experiments, strange readings would appear briefly, spike, then disappear. Interesting, but inconclusive. This time, multiple instruments detected the same phenomenon simultaneously, not just one sensor malfunctioning or picking up interference. Every piece of equipment, calibrated independently, registered identical anomalies at precisely the same time. According to sources familiar with the data, the readings didn't match any known category. It wasn't standard electromagnetic interference from power lines or radio towers. The signature was completely different. It wasn't geological activity. Seismographs showed no corresponding movement. It wasn't atmospheric. Weather conditions were stable. And it wasn't equipment failure, because once they swapped in backup instruments, the readings continued unchanged. But here's what really disturbed the team. The anomaly had structure. It wasn't random noise or chaotic signals. It showed patterns. Repetition, sequences that suggested organization. One researcher, speaking anonymously, described it as looking less like natural phenomena and more like data transmission, as if something was broadcasting on frequencies they happened to be monitoring. The data was concerning because it didn't fit into comfortable categories. UAPs can be explained away as misidentified aircraft or atmospheric phenomena. Geological anomalies can be attributed to unique mineral compositions or underground structures. Electromagnetic interference can be blamed on equipment or distant sources, but data showing clear structure, perfect synchronization across multiple independent systems, and patterns that suggested intentional organization, that was something different entirely. This wasn't interesting data that would make for a compelling episode. This was concerning data that made scientists stop and reconsider whether they should be conducting these experiments at all. Because if something was responding to their tests, if something was broadcasting back, then the fundamental assumption underlying the investigation was wrong. They weren't just observing passive phenomena. They were interacting with something active. The data review session that followed the experiment revealed something that shouldn't have been possible. Conflicting readings that violated basic physics were appearing simultaneously. Instruments detecting electromagnetic fields in ranges that should have required massive power sources, yet thermal imaging showed no heat signatures. Radiation detectors registering particles that left no trace on film or digital sensors. audio equipment picking up frequencies below human hearing range, but sound pressure meters showing no corresponding waves. Scientists on the team started using a term they'd avoided throughout the entire investigation: impossible. Not unlikely, not unexplained, impossible, because the data sets were mutually exclusive. If instrument A was correct, instrument B's readings couldn't exist. If instrument B was functioning properly, instrument A's data violated known laws. Yet both were calibrated correctly, both were functioning as designed, and both were recording contradictory realities. Then came the detail that made everyone stop talking and start genuinely worrying. The signals didn't stop when they shut down the equipment. Standard protocol after capturing interesting data is to power everything down, verify the anomaly disappears, then power back up to see if it returns. This helps eliminate the possibility that your own equipment is creating the phenomena you're trying to measure. They shut down every piece of electronic equipment on the ranch. Generators, computers, sensors, everything. The baseline readings should have dropped to near zero. Instead, the signal persisted. Not as strong, but definitely present, which meant whatever they were detecting existed independent of their observation. It was there whether they were measuring it or not. And somehow, impossibly, their instruments were still detecting it even when powered off. But the truly disturbing realization came when they analyzed the pattern over time. The signal wasn't random, it wasn't consistent, it was adaptive. During the first hour of testing, it appeared in one frequency range. When they focused their instruments on that range, it shifted to another. When they broadened their monitoring, it split across multiple frequencies. It was as if something was testing their capabilities, learning what they could detect, adjusting its behavior accordingly. This crossed a fundamental line in scientific investigation. You can study phenomena that don't understand they're being studied. Weather doesn't know you're measuring it. Geological formations don't care about your seismographs. But if something is responding to observation, if it's adjusting behavior based on how you're measuring it, then you're not conducting passive research anymore. You're engaged in an interaction, and interactions can go both ways. Before this experiment, safety concerns at Skinwalker Ranch focused on practical matters. Don't stand under the drilling rig. Wear protective equipment during rocket launches. Maintain safe distances from high-powered laser and RF equipment. Standard industrial safety protocols for the kind of testing they were conducting. But after this data came back, the conversation about safety changed fundamentally. Medical monitoring of team members had been routine throughout the investigation. Blood work, basic physicals, standard stuff to ensure nothing on the ranch was causing obvious health problems. But in the days following this particular experiment, several team members reported symptoms that couldn't be easily explained. Severe headaches that lasted for days, sleep disruption, vivid dreams that multiple people described in eerily similar terms, a general sense of unease that persisted even after leaving the property. One researcher described it as feeling watched, even at home, hundreds of miles from the ranch. Another reported technology malfunctions that started after the experiment. Phones dying randomly, computers crashing, electrical systems in his house behaving strangely. Were these symptoms connected to the experiment, psychosomatic responses to fear, or something else? The team couldn't say with certainty, and that uncertainty was itself concerning. Dr. Travis Taylor, who'd been advocating for increasingly aggressive testing to provoke responses, suddenly started talking about protocols and caution. Sources say he had conversations with Brandon Fugal about whether they were exposing the team to something they didn't understand and couldn't protect against. Not physical danger. You can wear protective gear and maintain safe distances. But psychological or neurological effects that might not show up on standard medical tests. The phrase that kept coming up in internal discussions was informed consent. Everyone on the team had agreed to investigate strange phenomena. They'd signed waivers acknowledging physical risks, but nobody had consented to exposure to something that might affect consciousness or cognition in ways medical science couldn't predict or treat. How do you get informed consent when neither you nor your subjects understand what you're dealing with? This was the moment when the investigation stopped being about discovery and became about exposure, about whether pushing for answers was worth potential harm to the people doing the pushing, and critically, about whether continuing to provoke responses was making things worse. Because if the phenomena could adapt, if it could respond, if it could somehow affect people even after they left the property, then every experiment wasn't just gathering data. It was escalating an interaction that nobody fully understood. Anyone who's watched the show closely over multiple seasons can see the shift. Certain locations on the ranch that were featured prominently in early episodes quietly disappeared from later investigations, not because they stopped being interesting, because they became too concerning to continue studying with cameras rolling and crew members present. One area in particular, a section near the East Field, was the focus of intense investigation investigation in the first 2 seasons. High radiation readings, strange lights, equipment malfunctions, classic Skinwalker Ranch phenomena. Then, after a specific incident that was filmed but never aired, that zone was quietly removed from the rotation. Experiments started happening everywhere else on the property. That particular location stopped appearing in episodes. The official explanation, when fans noticed, was simple. They were exploring other areas of the ranch to get more comprehensive data. But people familiar with the production tell a different story. After the incident, a decision was made at the highest levels that this area would be monitored remotely only. No personnel on site during active phenomena, no film crews. The zone wasn't abandoned because it was uninteresting. It was cordoned off because it was too active. What makes avoidance revealing is context. Throughout the show's run, the team has deliberately put themselves in uncomfortable situations, flying helicopters in areas known for equipment failure, digging in zones with radiation concerns, conducting experiments that they knew might trigger reactions. These aren't people who scare easily or avoid risk. So when they collectively decide that a location is off limits for direct investigation, it tells you something significant happened there. Sources describe the incident that led to the decision as a near miss, not physical danger in the traditional sense. No one was injured, but something happened during filming that made everyone present extremely uncomfortable. Multiple crew members refused to return to that specific area. Insurance concerns were raised, and Brandon Fugel made the call that whatever data they might gather wasn't worth the risk to personnel. The lesson here is important. Some areas aren't off limits because they're empty or explained away. They're restricted because they're too full of activity that nobody wants to interact with up close anymore. Observation from a distance is one thing. Direct exposure is something else entirely. And the decision to maintain distance after years of aggressive investigation speaks volumes about what they experienced in that zone. One of the strangest aspects of the shutdown involves the delayed reaction to footage. During filming, everyone on site was focused on equipment, data streams, and immediate observations. The atmosphere was professional, scientific, controlled. Yes, strange things happened, but in the moment, with cameras rolling and a job to do, people stayed focused on documentation. The unease came later, during the review sessions when editors started going through raw footage frame by frame, when producers watched everything that had been captured without the distraction of being on site. That's when people started seeing things that nobody noticed during actual filming. Details in the background, patterns in the data visualizations, sequences that didn't make sense when viewed in isolation, but became disturbing when seen in context. One editor described the experience as watching something change the longer you looked at it. He'd review a segment, mark it for inclusion, then come back to it hours later and see something different. Not literally different, the footage hadn't changed, but his perception of what was happening in the frame had shifted. Details that seemed insignificant during the first viewing became prominent. Patterns emerged that he couldn't unsee once noticed. Multiple crew members reported that reviewing footage affected them more than being on the ranch during filming, which doesn't make logical sense. You'd think direct exposure would be more impactful than watching recorded video in a comfortable editing bay. But the repeated viewing, the ability to pause and examine frames, the process of trying to understand what they'd captured, that's what got under people's skin. Then came the reports from people who worked on the footage off-site, away from the ranch entirely. Editors in Los Angeles, color correction specialists in New York, sound designers who never set foot in Utah. They started reporting strange experiences, dreams about the ranch, a sense of being observed while working on specific segments, technology problems that seemed concentrated around footage from particular experiments. This is where things get genuinely unsettling. If phenomena could somehow extend beyond the physical location through recorded media, then documentation wasn't a safe distance observation anymore. It was a vector. Every copy of the footage, every hard drive, every review session, potentially extending whatever was happening at the ranch to people who'd never been there. The real shock didn't come from being present during the experiments. It came from trying to understand what had been captured afterward. Networks shut down productions for predictable reasons: budget overruns, declining ratings, cast conflicts, safety violations, standard entertainment industry issues that happen all the time and get resolved through normal business processes. What happened with Skinwalker Ranch wasn't any of those things. The show was profitable, ratings were strong, the team worked well together. By every conventional metric, production should have continued. But there's a difference between a ratings problem and a liability problem. Ratings can be fixed with better marketing or format changes. Liability issues, especially ones involving crew health and safety, require immediate action and careful legal review. When multiple people start reporting psychological effects, when medical concerns arise, when insurance companies start asking questions, that's when network executives get involved directly. Sources within the network describe a series of high-level meetings that happened in the days following following the shutdown. Legal teams were consulted, insurance carriers were notified, medical professionals were brought in to evaluate crew members. This wasn't creative executives discussing storylines. This was risk management trying to understand potential exposure and liability. The decision to pause production came from above the show's production team. Brandon Fugal owns the ranch and could have continued private investigations. The core team wanted to keep working. But when a network's corporate structure gets involved, when lawyers start reviewing what happened rather than producers, that signals a fundamental shift from entertainment concerns to legal and safety concerns. What makes this shutdown different from past controversies or production problems is the speed and completeness. Past issues with paranormal shows have led to format changes or cast replacements. This led to a full stop. No announcements about retooling, no statements about when filming might resume, just vague mentions of technical issues and ongoing assessment, the kind of corporate language that indicates serious concerns being discussed privately while public statements remain deliberately uninformative. Someone higher up decided this shouldn't continue, at least not in its current form. Whether that decision was driven by genuine concern for crew safety, fear of legal liability, or something else entirely, we may never know. But the fact that it happened, that a successful show with strong ratings was shut down mid-season without clear explanation, tells you everything about how seriously this situation was taken at the highest corporate levels. Every reality show captures far more footage than ever makes it to air. For every hour of television, you might shoot 30 or 40 hours of raw material. Most of what gets cut is boring. Equipment setup, failed takes, conversations that don't advance the narrative. But sometimes footage gets cut for other reasons. Because it doesn't fit the show's format, because it raises questions the producers can't answer, because it's too ambiguous to include but too clear to completely dismiss. Skinwalker Ranch has an archive of footage that was never meant to be aired, experiments that produced results too strange to contextualize in a television format, moments where equipment behaved in ways that suggested either massive technical failure or phenomena beyond current explanation, crew reactions that were too genuine, too unsettled to fit the show's somewhat measured scientific tone. One particular piece of footage, described by multiple sources but never publicly released, shows an experiment where everything went wrong at once. Multiple equipment failures, data streams contradicting each other in real time, and in the background, something visible on thermal cameras that shouldn't have been there. Not a person, not an animal, something that registered heat in patterns that didn't match any known biological signature. The footage was reviewed extensively, enhanced, analyzed by multiple experts. The consensus was that it showed something real, something physical enough to register on multiple sensors, but what it showed couldn't be easily explained. It wasn't clear enough to definitively prove anything extraordinary, but it was too clear to dismiss as equipment malfunction or misidentification. It existed in the uncomfortable middle ground where debunking fails but proof remains elusive. The decision was made to keep this footage in the vault, not because it was boring or irrelevant, because silence can be a form of containment. If you can't explain something and you can't debunk it, sometimes the safest option is to not show it at all. Let people speculate about what might have been captured rather than giving them actual footage that raises more questions than it answers. This is where the shutdown becomes most interesting from a disclosure perspective. Everything that aired on the show was carefully curated to be compelling but ultimately explainable within the show's framework. Mysterious but not definitively proven. The footage that never aired, that sits in archives under legal protection and non-disclosure agreements, that might tell a very different story. Not everything is debunked by science and skepticism. Some things are simply buried because they don't fit into comfortable narratives about what's possible. The question everyone asks is whether the ranch is still active without cameras, whether experiments continue privately, whether the phenomena that made Skinwalker Ranch famous persist when nobody is watching or documenting. The answer, based on everything we can piece together, is yes. Activity continues, investigation continues, but the nature of how it's being studied has fundamentally changed. Brandon Fugal has made it clear the ranch remains a focus of serious scientific investigation, but that investigation is happening differently now. More remote monitoring, more automated data collection, less direct human presence during active phenomena. The shift suggests lessons learned from whatever led to the shutdown. That proximity to certain events carries risks that can be mitigated through distance and technological intermediation. The patterns observed over years of investigation suggest that whatever happens at Skinwalker Ranch doesn't depend on human observation. The phenomena existed before the show. They'll exist after. Cameras and scientific instruments might make the events visible and documentable, but they don't create them, which raises an uncomfortable question. If filming stops but activity continues, boundaries. What was the investigation actually accomplishing besides documentation? Some researchers argue that aggressive investigation, deliberately provoking responses, attempting to trigger phenomena through experimentation, might have escalated whatever exists there. That each rocket launch, each drilling operation, each electromagnetic pulse wasn't just observing passive phenomena, but actively engaging with something responsive, and that engagement potentially made things worse. The shutdown might represent a recognition that the paradigm was wrong. You can't treat intelligent, responsive phenomena like laboratory subjects. You can't provoke and measure something that might be measuring you back. The scientific method works beautifully for studying things that don't know they're being studied. It becomes problematic when the subject of investigation is aware of the observer and potentially capable of responding in ways that affect the observer. Looking forward, Skinwalker Ranch will likely remain an active research site, but the research will be more cautious, more respectful of boundaries that weren't clear until they were crossed, less focused on making compelling television, and more concerned with understanding phenomena without unnecessarily escalating interaction. Because the ultimate lesson of the shutdown is simple. Stopping observation doesn't stop activity, but it might stop whatever consequences come from aggressive investigation of things we don't yet understand. They found them at dawn. Dozens of coyote bodies piled beneath the Skinwalker Ranch sign like some kind of grotesque offering. No wounds, no blood, no signs of struggle or predation, just dead animals stacked in a pattern that made the security team immediately call for scientific backup. And when Dr. Travis Taylor arrived on scene, the first thing he said was, "This violates every principle of natural animal behavior I know." Within 48 hours, officials from multiple agencies descended on the property. Wildlife biologists, federal investigators, veterinary pathologists, and after examining the scene, reviewing the overnight security footage, and conducting preliminary autopsies, they made an unprecedented decision. Label the incident as potentially paranormal in origin, because nothing in conventional science could explain what happened to those coyotes or why it happened at Skinwalker Ranch. Subscribe now, because what we're about to reveal will challenge everything you thought you knew about what's possible at America's most paranormally active property. It was March 17th when Dragon, Skinwalker Ranch's head of security, made his routine morning patrol of the property perimeter. The sun was just coming up over the Utah desert, casting long shadows across the 512-acre ranch. Dragon had been doing this patrol for years, checking fence lines, examining overnight camera footage, making sure nothing unusual had occurred during the night hours when the ranch is most active. But as he approached the main entrance, the weathered sign reading Skinwalker Ranch visible in the early light, he saw something that made him stop the vehicle immediately. A massive pile of what appeared to be animal bodies directly beneath the ranch sign. From a distance, he couldn't identify the species, but the sheer number of carcasses was immediately alarming. Dragon radioed base camp immediately. His voice, normally calm and professional even when reporting strange phenomena, carried an edge of genuine concern. "We have a situation at the main entrance. Multiple animal casualties. I need the science team out here now." He didn't approach the pile initially. Years of working at Skinwalker Ranch had taught him that unusual scenes should be documented before being disturbed. When the initial response team arrived, they confirmed what Dragon had seen. Coyotes, dozens of them. At least 40 bodies, possibly more, stacked in what appeared to be a deliberate pile directly under the ranch entrance sign. The arrangement wasn't random. The bodies were layered, almost organized, in a way that suggested intentional placement rather than natural accumulation. But what immediately struck everyone present was what wasn't there. No blood, no visible wounds, no signs of struggle in the surrounding dirt, no tracks other than the coyote's own paw prints leading to the location, and perhaps most disturbing, no scavenger activity. In the Utah desert, dead animals attract scavengers within hours. Ravens, vultures, other coyotes, insects, but these bodies appeared untouched by any other wildlife. The team immediately secured the scene and began documentation. Photographs from multiple angles, video recording, measurements of the pile's dimensions, an account of the bodies, which eventually reached 43 individual coyotes of varying ages and both sexes. That number itself was significant. Coyotes are typically solitary hunters or operate in small family groups. To have 43 individuals in one location simultaneously violated normal behavioral patterns. Dr. Travis Taylor, the ranch's chief scientist, was off property that morning, but was immediately contacted. His response was to drop everything and drive directly to Skinwalker Ranch, calling in additional expertise en route, because even over the phone, hearing the description of what had been found, he knew this wasn't a natural occurrence. And he knew that whatever investigation followed would need to be documented meticulously because the findings were going to be extraordinary. Dr. Travis Taylor arrived at Skinwalker Ranch 3 hours after the discovery. As an astrophysicist and aerospace engineer with decades of experience in scientific investigation, Taylor approaches anomalies with rigorous methodology. He's investigated everything from advanced propulsion systems to unexplained aerial phenomena. But as he later told colleagues, nothing in his scientific background prepared him for the scene beneath that ranch sign. Taylor's first action was to establish a controlled perimeter and ensure no one had disturbed the scene beyond initial documentation. He needed to preserve evidence integrity before conducting detailed analysis. Then he began his examination, starting with the overall scene configuration and working down to individual carcasses. The pile's arrangement immediately struck him as non-random. The bodies were oriented in a pattern, heads generally pointing inward, with larger individuals at the base and smaller ones toward the top. That kind of organization doesn't happen naturally. When animals die in groups, whether from disease, poisoning, or environmental factors, they fall randomly. This looked arranged. An arrangement implies intelligence and purpose. Taylor examined individual carcasses for signs of trauma. In his own words, captured on the investigation video, "I'm looking at these animals and I see no external injuries, no gunshot wounds, no signs of blunt force trauma, no indication of predator attacks. These coyotes didn't die from physical violence. So what killed them?" The condition of the bodies presented another puzzle. They appeared to have died recently within the past 12 to 18 hours, based on rigor mortis and environmental factors. But there was no decomposition smell, which should have been present in 40-plus dead animals even after just hours in the desert heat. Taylor noted this absence repeatedly during his examination, clearly troubled by the implication that normal biological processes weren't occurring as expected. Most disturbing to Taylor was the behavioral impossibility of the scene. Coyotes are intelligent, cautious animals. They don't congregate in large numbers. They're territorial. They avoid areas with heavy human activity. For 43 coyotes to be in the same location simultaneously, close enough to end up in a pile together, violated everything known about coyote social behavior and territorial patterns. Taylor made a statement that would later be widely quoted. "In 30 years of scientific investigation, I've never encountered a scenario where the evidence so completely contradicts established behavioral and biological principles. Either we're missing something fundamental about coyote behavior, or something happened here that doesn't fit into conventional scientific frameworks. And given that this is Skinwalker Ranch, I'm inclined toward the latter explanation." His immediate recommendation was to conduct full necropsies on multiple specimens, test for toxins and disease, review all overnight security footage, and bring in additional experts with specialized knowledge in wildlife pathology. Because whatever had happened here, Taylor knew it was going to require expertise beyond his own to even begin understanding. Skinwalker Ranch maintains extensive security camera coverage, including multiple angles on the main entrance where the coyote pile was discovered. The overnight footage was immediately pulled and reviewed, and what it showed was as disturbing as the pile itself, because the cameras captured the coyotes arriving, but what they didn't capture was any clear cause of death. The footage begins at approximately 11:47 p.m. the previous night. The area under the ranch sign is empty, normal nighttime scene. Then at 11:52 p.m., the first coyote appears on camera, walking normally. No signs of distress or unusual behavior. It approaches the area beneath the sign and simply stops, stands there, completely still. Over the next 43 minutes, more coyotes arrive. They come from different directions, appearing at the edge of camera range and walking directly to the spot beneath the sign. Each one displays the same behavior: approach, stop, stand motionless. They don't interact with each other, don't show any signs of aggression or fear, just converge on this specific location and freeze. By 12:35 a.m., 43 coyotes are standing in a group beneath the ranch sign. The footage shows them all motionless, not pacing, not looking around, just standing in absolute stillness in a formation that's becoming increasingly organized and dense. Then, at 12:41 a.m., something happens that the review team watched repeatedly, trying to understand. All the coyotes collapse simultaneously, not gradually, not in sequence, all at once, as if someone had cut their strings. They drop to the ground in perfect synchronization. And here's what makes it impossible. There's no visible cause, no flash of light, no sound on the audio track, no object entering frame. They simply all fall at exactly the same moment. Dr. Travis Taylor analyzed this footage frame by frame. His observation: the synchronization is too perfect to be coincidental. We're talking about 43 individual animals dropping within the same half-second window. The probability of that happening randomly approaches zero. Something caused this, something that affected all of them simultaneously. And whatever it was, it's not visible on our camera systems. The footage continues for another 6 hours until dawn. During that entire time, nothing approaches the pile. No scavengers, no other coyotes, no wildlife at all. The area is completely avoided by every other animal species, as if they could sense something wrong with the location. That avoidance behavior continued for 3 days after the bodies were removed. But there's one more detail in the footage that investigators found deeply unsettling. At 3:17 a.m., approximately 3 hours after the coyotes collapsed, there's a brief electromagnetic interference spike on all camera feeds. The image pixelates for about 4 seconds. When the feeds clear, the coyote bodies have been rearranged into the neat pile that was discovered at dawn. Something moved 43 dead coyotes into an organized configuration during those 4 seconds of interference. And there's no visible evidence of what did the moving. 6 coyote carcasses were transported to a veterinary pathology facility in Salt Lake City for comprehensive necropsy. The team conducting the examinations included 2 board-certified veterinary pathologists and a wildlife disease specialist. They approached the autopsies expecting to find poisoning, disease, or some other identifiable cause of death. What they found instead was medical impossibility. The external examination revealed no trauma whatsoever. No wounds, no bruising, no broken bones, no signs of struggle. The animals appeared physically pristine, except for being dead. Internal examination showed all major organs present and, bizarrely, appearing normal. Heart, lungs, liver, kidneys, all looked healthy on gross examination. But tissue samples told a different story. Under microscopic examination, cells throughout the coyotes' bodies showed signs of catastrophic failure. Not gradual degradation like you'd see in disease or poisoning. Instant cellular death, as if every cell in their bodies had simultaneously stopped functioning. One pathologist described it as looking like the animals had been switched off at a cellular level. Toxicology screening found no poisons, no drugs, no environmental toxins. Blood chemistry was normal except for elevated stress hormones, suggesting the animals experienced extreme fear immediately before death. But there was no identifiable cause for that fear response, and stress alone doesn't cause instantaneous death in healthy animals. Dr. Travis Taylor attended the necropsy presentations and asked pointed questions about the cellular damage patterns. Could radiation cause this? Answer: no. The damage pattern was wrong and there was no radiation detected. Could electromagnetic pulse cause this? Answer: theoretically possible, but would require field strength that would have fried all the ranch's electronic equipment. Could sound frequency cause this? Answer: unlikely, and no unusual acoustic signatures were detected on the overnight recordings. The pathology team's official report concluded, cause of death cannot be determined through conventional veterinary pathology. The cellular damage observed is inconsistent with any known natural or man-made agent. This conclusion, essentially admitting that medical science couldn't explain how these animals died, was unprecedented in the pathologist's combined 40 years of experience. One additional finding troubled everyone involved. Brain tissue examination showed unusual activity patterns in the neurons, specifically in areas associated with fear response and motor control. The patterns suggested the animals had been experiencing intense terror and had simultaneously lost voluntary muscle control. They were conscious and terrified, but unable to flee, and then something killed them all at once. The mass coyote death triggered involvement from multiple government agencies. Utah Division of Wildlife Resources sent field investigators. The USDA's Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service dispatched disease specialists. Even the FBI's liaison for unusual incidents in federal territories made inquiries, given Skinwalker Ranch's proximity to restricted airspace and government installations. Wildlife officials initially suspected poisoning, possibly from illegal predator control efforts by neighboring ranchers, but field investigation found no evidence of bait stations, no toxins in soil samples, and testing of the carcasses ruled out all common and uncommon poisons. The hypothesis was quickly abandoned. Disease was the next avenue of investigation. The CDC was consulted about potential novel pathogens. Rabies, distemper, and other known wildlife diseases were ruled out through testing. The pathology findings of instant cellular death didn't match any known disease progression, and the fact that no other wildlife in the area showed any signs of illness eliminated epidemic explanations. Environmental factors were examined extensively. Electromagnetic anomalies, radiation, toxic gas seepage, infrasound. Every measurable environmental variable was tested, and nothing abnormal was detected except during that brief 4-second window of camera interference when the bodies were rearranged. And nothing abnormal was detected except during that brief 4-second window of camera interference when the bodies were rearranged. And that anomaly itself couldn't be characterized beyond electromagnetic disturbance of unknown origin. After 3 weeks of investigation, a confidential briefing was held involving representatives from multiple agencies and the Skinwalker Ranch research team. According to sources present at that meeting, the discussion became heated when conventional explanations were exhausted. The evidence pointed to something that standard investigative frameworks couldn't accommodate. The decision to label the incident as potentially paranormal in origin came from that meeting. Not an official public statement, but internal classification used in government documentation. The terminology used was anomalous mass mortality event with characteristics suggesting non-natural causation. In government bureaucracy, that phrasing is as close as agencies get to saying paranormal without using the word. Dr. Travis Taylor attended portions of that briefing and later stated, "When federal investigators, people who approach everything from a position of scientific skepticism, start using language that essentially acknowledges paranormal possibilities, you know the evidence has forced them into uncomfortable territory. These aren't people who believe in ghosts or UFOs by default, but they looked at the data and couldn't provide conventional explanations." The official public statement from Utah Wildlife Resources was carefully worded, "We investigated a mass mortality event involving coyotes at a private property. Cause of death could not be definitively established. The incident appears to be isolated and does not pose risk to public health or other wildlife." That bland statement concealed the extraordinary reality of what investigators had found, or more accurately, what they'd failed to find any normal explanation for. The coyote incident wasn't the first mass animal event at Skinwalker Ranch, but it was the largest and best documented. The property has a history of cattle mutilations, mysterious livestock deaths, and wildlife behaving in impossible ways. But this incident, with 43 coyotes simultaneously dying for no determinable medical reason, represented a significant escalation in both scale and strangeness. Dr. Travis Taylor and the research team began comparing the coyote incident to previous animal-related phenomena at the ranch. Patterns emerged. The incidents tend to occur in specific areas of the property. They often happen during periods of increased electromagnetic activity. They frequently involve behavior that violates known animal psychology. Animals approaching locations they should instinctively avoid, showing no fear response when they should flee, converging in groups when they should be solitary. Previous cattle mutilations showed similar impossible characteristics: surgical precision without tool marks, complete blood drainage without evidence of how it was removed, organs extracted without disturbing surrounding tissue. The coyote pile represented a different manifestation of the same underlying pattern. Whatever affects this property can interact with living creatures in ways that violate biological and physical laws. Taylor developed a hypothesis, though he emphasized it was highly speculative. What if the phenomena at Skinwalker Ranch can exert some kind of control over biological systems? Not just observation, which is what we see with the orbs and aerial phenomena, but actual influence over living things. The coyotes all arriving at the same location, standing motionless, dying simultaneously. That suggests external control at a neurological level. This hypothesis is disturbing because it implies intelligence and capability far beyond simple observation. If something at Skinwalker Ranch can compel animals to gather, paralyze them, kill them simultaneously, and then arrange their bodies, what does that mean for human safety? The ranch has had hundreds of visitors over the years. People work there daily. If the phenomena wanted to affect humans the way it apparently affected those coyotes, could it? Brandon Fugel, the ranch's owner, addressed this concern publicly. "We take safety extremely seriously. We have protocols. We monitor constantly, and we've never had a human injury related to paranormal activity. But I'll be honest, the coyote incident made us reconsider our understanding of what we're dealing with. This isn't just lights in the sky or equipment malfunctions. This is something that can affect living biology in profound ways." The pattern recognition extended beyond animal incidents. The electromagnetic interference that occurred when the coyote bodies were rearranged matched signatures from previous incidents where objects moved or equipment failed. The timing, always during overnight hours between midnight and 4 a.m., aligned with peak activity periods documented over years of monitoring. The location, directly beneath the ranch entrance sign, was symbolic in a way that suggested intentional messaging. Taylor's conclusion: whatever is happening at Skinwalker Ranch isn't random. It follows patterns. It seems to have preferences for certain locations and times. It responds to human presence and investigation. And critically, it appears to be escalating. The phenomena are becoming more dramatic, more frequent, and harder to dismiss as misidentification or equipment error. The coyote pile represents a threshold moment where denying intelligent causation becomes more difficult than accepting. When conventional explanations fail, speculation begins. Scientists, researchers, and paranormal investigators have proposed multiple theories about what could cause the type of mass mortality seen in the coyote incident. None are satisfying. All raise more questions than they answer. Theory 1. Advanced directed energy weapon. Some speculate that military testing of classified technology could explain the incident. A weapon system capable of targeting biological systems, inducing cardiac arrest or neurological shutdown from a distance. But this theory has problems. Why would military testing occur at a private ranch? Why would the government allow investigations if they were responsible? And what kind of weapon arranges bodies after killing? Theory 2. Electromagnetic anomaly of natural origin. Utah's geology includes unusual mineral deposits and underground formations that could theoretically produce electromagnetic effects. But Dr. Travis Taylor addressed this directly. We've surveyed this property extensively with ground-penetrating radar and electromagnetic sensors. Yes, there are geological features. No, none of them explain synchronized biological shutdown of 43 animals. Natural EM fields don't work that way. Theory 3. Infrasound or ultrasound frequencies. Certain sound frequencies can affect animal behavior and potentially induce fear or disorientation. Some researchers propose that underground geological activity or equipment malfunction could have produced frequencies that affected the coyotes, but acoustic analysis of the overnight recordings showed no unusual sound signatures, and sound frequency doesn't explain the pile arrangement. Theory 4. Paranormal entity or intelligence. This is where the speculation becomes uncomfortable for scientifically minded researchers. The theory suggests that Skinwalker Ranch is inhabited by or attracts some form of non-human intelligence capable of affecting physical reality. The coyotes were compelled to gather, paralyzed through unknown means, killed simultaneously, and their bodies arranged as either a message or a territorial display. Dr. Travis Taylor, when pressed on which theory he found most plausible, gave a careful response. I'm a scientist. I deal in evidence and testable hypotheses, but I'm also honest about what the evidence shows. We have documented phenomena that don't fit conventional frameworks. The electromagnetic signatures, the synchronized biological effects, the apparent intelligence behind the arrangement. All of this points to something we don't understand operating by rules we haven't discovered. Whether you call that paranormal or just extremely advanced unknown technology, the practical result is the same. We're dealing with something beyond current scientific explanation. Theory 5. Interdimensional or quantum effects. Some physicists consulting on Skinwalker Ranch investigations have proposed that the property might be experiencing effects from quantum phenomena or even interdimensional bleed-through. This theory suggests that what we perceive as paranormal activity is actually natural physics, operating at scales or in ways we don't yet understand. The coyotes might have been affected by localized alterations in space-time or quantum field fluctuations. Each theory attempts to bridge the gap between documented evidence and possible explanation, but they all share a common problem. They require accepting that something extraordinary is occurring. Whether it's classified military technology, unknown natural phenomena, non-human intelligence, or exotic physics, any explanation for the coyote incident forces us to acknowledge that our understanding of reality is incomplete. And for most people, that's more disturbing than any specific theory.